Hey folks, Phil Gallagher of ThrabenU here for another Daily Death and Taxes. We're again playing Michael Braverman's Yorion D&T list. Check out the deck tech from Monday for more details. We're keeping really average, unimpressive looking opening hand. Not knowing what our opponent is on, it's probably fine to keep this in the dark. But it's the sort of deck where, or sort of hand where if our opponent is just playing something like Storm, we're stone cold dead to them. Alright. We're playing a mirror in which I have a companion and my opponent doesn't. That bodes very well for me. Giving my opponent mana here super sucks when they're not on an Ether Vial hand, obviously. But, like, we're on a Jitte hand, and we don't get the luxury of, like, really not playing towards Jitte connecting as soon as possible. Sort of interestingly here, we could get a Batterskull, put in Batterskull in this turn cycle, and then Jitte attack with Batterskull later. But I think I'm all about just like slamming Mirran Crusader next turn, and then trying to go for 4 counters in one turn. I don't know. Like, the Path to Exile really makes some of the math wonky. Like, for example, if I was to rely on Batterskull and my opponent just plays a Mirran Crusader this turn, life's super awkward. And, like, similarly, I've accelerated them into other lines where they can do things like Mom plus Port Me or Mom plus Revoker. Things are definitely weird since I've, like, pathed my opponent. It's possible that going for the Batterskull early is good because it gives me like one more Yorion blink target later. But that might be a stretch. Opponent might similarly be in a bit of a weird spot. They're taking a while with their decision here. They might be thinking about something like Recruiter, and like what would they Recruiter for? It's weird to do like mental Recruiter math come turn 2. So like another thing that sucks is that if my opponent naturally had their Jitte, they can get in a Jitte attack before I can, and there's not a lot that I can do about that. Bomb's an interesting draw. So the question is, how do I want to play this turn? My opponent has Wasteland. Specifically, I want to play Jitte out in this turn cycle. If they don't have Wasteland specifically, I do not want to play Jitte in this turn cycle. Cheeky Stoneforge attack here is interesting, but I don't think I'm gonna make it. Both of these pieces of equipment have their strengths here. I am going to just get Sword of Fire and Ice. It's going to play a little bit better around a Phyrexian Revoker from my opponent. If I get Batterskull and my opponent like revokes Stoneforge Mystic and wastelands me, like life can be weird. Or similarly, if they have a Revoker and they just revoke Jitte and I get Batterskull, like the Batterskull will do work but doesn't necessarily end things by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, there we go. So like now I still get a piece of active equipment. My opponent could like revoke Stoneforge Mystic and then port me so that I don't get active equipment in the next turn cycle. But then they've tied up like a lot of their mana and not really getting anywhere, and they haven't solved the threat. That was almost certainly incorrect to do. They could have ported to the same effect. I'm not going to have anything to do with the colorless mana at instant speed with this revoked. Now it's probably time to play out a piece of equipment. I can play out the Crusader and then go for Jitte next turn, but like if they port me, life gets awkward, so I should play out one of these two. In terms of mana efficiency, playing out Sword of Fire and Ice is better. In terms of winning the game, Jitte is better. Jitte also lets me represent Swords to Plowshares. And I'm not going to take any Stoneforge's attacks here. Like, I'm not going to win this game based on like reducing my opponent's life total to 0. I'm going to win this game by connecting with equipment once. So like one equipment connection means that I wipe my opponent's board. So like all I need to dodge is my opponent going like land Jitte. Another Revoker is kind of annoying as well, but like we still have great long-term prospects versus that. This is not gonna do what you want it to do, opponent. I like really hate to tell you. This does not end well for you. So they're going to put this on Jitte, and instead I am just going to equip a Stoneforge Mystic and attack in with Sword of Fire and Ice. And then I put them in the Abyss. I can choose to play out this turn in a couple of different ways, depending on what my draws look like. I can expose myself to Swords to Plowshares in order to get protection here and kill the creature that I want. Or I can just say, hey, I will trade Stoneforge for one of your creatures of your choosing, and I'm totally fine with that. I think it's correct to play in the way that does not expose me to Swords to Plowshares. So like opponent will block. How they block is interesting. That is how I would have blocked. Because it plays towards allowing my opponent to top deck their own Jitte. All right, that's an interesting inclusion from my opponent. Playing like Thought-Knot Seers or something like that justify that. That would allow Stoneforge Mystic Jitte equip, which is pretty good. Yeah. Generally speaking, that feels helpful to me at this stage. That means that I now don't need to play around my opponent's Swords to Plowshares, and I can use my mom's much more aggressively. I wonder if that play just lost my opponent the match. Or not the match, but the game. Like, it was already bad for them, but like now I have no fear. Yeah. Like now I can make my Stoneforge connect, kill Sanctum Prelate, and both Flicker Wisps. Which seems devastating, and at that point if my opponent has Swords to Plowshares, I don't care. You can also leave the Sanctum Prelate on the board to play around opposing Swords to Plowshares, but I think this is too good to pass up on. Just like taking the extra card out of it as well. All right, good stuff. What do we have for the mirror? Containment Priest is weird. Relic Order is good. Council's Judgment is good. That's probably it. We have 3, maybe 4 cards. I do not want Sanctum Prelate. I do not want Thalia's. Tomics are better than Thalia's. The question is, do I want this second Thalia or do I want a Containment Priest? I have more blink than my opponent does due to my Yorion, so I don't actually think this Containment Priest favors me. We're definitely light on cards for this matchup, but I think that's often going to be the case when you're playing a Death and Taxes deck list that looks like this one. This pseudo mirror is definitely weird. The Path to Exile on my opponent made that game more interesting than it needed to be. So like if I had just had a Swords of Plowshares instead of Path to Exile, I think I'd just like run over my opponent so much sooner. This has to be a mulligan, unquestionably. This is a great hand to lose you the game on the spot. Like, you miss your second land drop, and then you get ported forever, or your opponent leads on Vial, and you just get buried in mana. Well, effective mana, not true mana, but you probably know what I mean if you're watching this series at this point. This is not a hand that wins a game on 5. I'll go to 4. Let's cut our losses. That was statistically unlikely. But I don't think I want to play the game where I'm like down 3 cards to start with in the mirror when I'm on the draw. I technically could have like waited a couple turns, gotten some more information, but like I'm good with that. Yeah, there are real noticeable downsides of playing these 80 card decks. Like Path to Exile in a matchup like this one is so much more noticeably worse than Swords to Plowshares. It's not even funny. So like I can start on an Aether Vial and have the mana advantage, but if my opponent plays Mom and I have to cast Path to Exile, all of a sudden the mana advantage is ripped right out from under me, and I'm actually behind in the matchup because my opponent can play things like Council's Judgment and remove the Vial or get an early Stoneforge going. The best world is where my opponent just passes the turn. Yeah, shit. Against matchups like Rug Delver, the Path to Exiles are like unquestionably better than Swords to Plowshares because they don't have the basics to get, and it's just a free roll. But in matchups like D&T, Maverick, Merfolk, Goblins, and things of that nature where they can get the basics, or even things like Blue-Red Delver, Path to Exile is pretty rough. And I'm noticing that this 80 card variant is not good at presenting any early pressure on the opponent, like at all. You're just not consistent enough to play something like turn 2 Thalia anymore. And so a lot of your aggressiveness goes out the window accordingly. We weren't super aggressive in the first place. Yeah, so like this sets up like Recruiter into Wisp early on, and my opponent can bury me in that card advantage, and then I'm like forced to Path to Exile a Recruiter of the Guard so that they don't get Wisp value off of it, or they can revoke my Vial or start the Palace Jailer subgame. Alright, they're going with equipment. That's not great for me, but it may mean that I don't need to blow Path to Exile on Recruiter and accelerate them even more. I'm gonna play Crusader for free next turn off my Vial if I tick my Vial up, so I might not tap out for it this turn. Yeah, we'll tap out for that. That's fine. I am A-okay with telegraphing that because that gives me a way to steal this game. I don't know that we'll go like put it on mom levels of crazy. But I'll definitely be thinking about it. You should have boarded that out. You have no excuse to have those in your deck. Thalia is very bad in the mirror due to Caracas, and so many of the battles are picked in the air rather than on the ground. So specifically because my opponent played Thalia, I probably need to leave this mom back. There's some worlds here where I'm in quite a bit of trouble. But if my opponent can't connect with Jitte this turn, I probably win the game. Probably, not guaranteed. But if I can get double Crusader hits in with Sword of Fire and Ice, that's pretty devastating. We can deal 8 damage and kill 2 creatures. All right, opponent, what do you have for me? I don't know that my opponent knows how to play the mirror well. They're down on like time a very considerable amount, so it feels like there's someone who is newer to this deck, and like they still have Thalias in post sideboard games, and some of their decisions in game 1 were definitely a little bit weird. Yeah, and not tapping your Stoneforge Mystic here in order to make that play is also strange. Yeah, so this is disgusting. So, how do I want to do this? I think I do go to the end step here. And so they're looking to port me down. And I'm not going to allow them to do that. So what I'll do here is I will tap down their Caracas. And then this shuts off their ability to cast something like Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile or Containment Priest during my turn. Ah, so that's what the ticket was. Batterskull? You have Batterskull. Okay, that's fine. Thalia here is slightly annoying because I can't also path. But we'll figure that out. It's going to be an always no. Land would be great. Flicker Wisp would be great. Council Judgment is not quite great. Or is it? pro-white Crusader, equip Crusader with sword, go to combat, use Crusader to kill Thalia and Stoneforged Mystic, draw 2 cards, have Path to Exile available for the creature that gets equipped with Umezawa's Jitte. Yup. We already have pro-black, so we don't need to worry about the Batterskull in the immediate future, and we do not care about the life gain if we're getting equipment connections in. There's also a lot of disgusting worlds where I draw into like some extra lands and flicker wisps that allow me to do some really cute stuff. First strike damage, this one kills the Thalia. Hollowed Spirit Keeper is super interesting. Regular damage, that kills Stoneforge Mystic. We don't want to have to worry about like repeated Batterskull bouncing, mucking up combat math later. Alright. Yeah, so now we just have Path to Exile up for whatever gets equipped with Jitte. My opponent can try to muck with me using Rishadan Port, but if I'm being honest, I don't know that they're going to see that line and play around it. They have a lot of things to be thinking about, like another Crusader, a Flicker Wisp. Like, there's so many things that muck with them that whether or not they'll play around like a Path or Source of Plowshares in particular is kind of weird. I also may not Path to Exile one of my opponent's creatures. I may just like block and Path to Exile my own creature. That's also a timeline that exists, so that I can get more lands. Kind of like thinking with portals. It's not an intuitive line, but it might be better than a lot of my other lines. Okay. What would you like to do with your Flicker Wisp? It's a little weird that my opponent is doing this prior to attempting to do something with Jitte. Okay, you're just going to unequip my sword. That's fine. So, like, Revoker is your follow-up? Or you're going to attempt to equip now? Yeah, in which case, Path to Exile on this Germ is pretty disgusting. I can Path to Exile on the Germ and then kill both of my opponent's creatures on their turn. While also getting like Recruiter plus Flicker Wisp going. Yeah. I'll take that. But I will let my opponent go ahead and attack in first. See if they attack in with Recruiter. Actually, is my opponent just dead to board now? Aren't they just dead too? Mirror Crusader 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, they're dead on board. And what's up with the pausing? We're done here. Are you gonna... Okay, no. Pro white. Equip. Yeah, there's not much too much else to say here. I think opponent played a little bit less optimally than I did, and it probably resulted in their death. Experience matters a lot in mirrors in particular, like no matter what the mirror is, and the Death and Taxes mirror is no exception. My opponent had like access to early Jitte, but I played in a way that kept them off of that from making that matter too much, and my opponent had some cards that were like maybe not great for the matchup, and that might have ended up costing them. All right, anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I'll be back tomorrow.